thank you everyone for being here today. We're going to have a very, very interesting session today, and we have Heather Equinoss with us, who is going to share very interesting case study. And just a quick introduction for today's session. My name is Yasmin. I'm going to be your host and facilitator today. And this is the systems change case study, which is part of the systems change module of the SI learning series that we've been into for 5 months, almost 5 months now. And it's been a very exciting journey. And just a few details about today's session. This is going to be, 60 minutes session. It's being recorded at the moment, and we're going to have moments for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but you're more than welcome to use the chat as well throughout the presentation, comments or questions, and we're going to have a specific moment to allocate them. All right. And as you know, this is part of the learning series that we've been having since February 15th. And today we're covering the case studies on systems change. And I'm very happy to introduce Heather today. And just a brief introduction, right? So Heather Equinoss focuses on supporting networks as a process designer and facilitator, either helping to start up or reboot their strategy. She's also one of the training developers and leads with CoCreative, in which she focuses on supporting network leaders, facilitators, and or sponsors with practical frameworks and methods to foster collaborative change making. She does one-on-one coaching work for network leaders and loves to use graphic recording to help people visualize what's emerging in a group session. So that's a quick introduction to Heather, and I'll let her take the floor in very soon. And just now, quick structure of our session. So yeah, 5 minutes of this quick introduction, then I'll pass it over to Heather so she can take the lead on the case study today. And at the end of the session, we're going to have 5 minutes for wrap-up, feedbacks, and just final details, next steps. Okay, so pass it over to Heather, and yeah, enjoy.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Appreciate the invite to be here with you all today. So I'm going to share a case study about one of the networks that CoCreative we helped start up and have supported over the last 5 years, called Nakama Ahaloa. But before I did that, I wondered if you all would be willing to I'll share a little bit more about CoCreative, and then I'll ask you all if you're willing to share a little bit more about yourselves using this tool called Slido. I just dropped a link in the chat to it, and I'll share a little bit more about that in just a sec. So in terms of who we are at CoCreative, you can see this is how we often describe our work, which is we help people who don't know each other and sometimes don't even like each other come together to solve systemic challenges. In terms of the kinds of issue areas or focus areas, we've worked on a lot. We're somewhat sort of issue agnostic, but we are guided by our core values, which are really around building shared prosperity. So often it's around issues of racial and economic equity, and also environmental sustainability. And usually, and many of our networks focus on places where all of those things intersect. And so we primarily do that work through starting what we refer to as collaborative innovation networks. And then over the years, we've also started to build out essentially a training program to support many other leaders who are interested in supporting this kind of collaborative change making, this collaborative innovation So we offer up some really practical tools and methodologies that we found useful in the networks that we've supported over the years. So since I can't see many of your faces, it sure would help me understand, and at least the people who have assembled in this call today, this community today, a little bit more about you. If you would be willing to use that Slido link, I would love to just understand two things. One, where are people located in the world? So you'll see if you click through on the link I dropped in the chat to Slido, there's one question there about where are you joining from? And secondly, what is a value that consistently informs your life and your work? So I'll pause a moment. I see people are responding. And I'll share the screen with some of those results in just a moment. Here comes. Here are some of the places we are joining from. Nice. Slovenia, Brighton, Montreal, Bogota, beautiful Calgary and London, Nashville, Tennessee, Washington, D.C. All right, great. I'm in far northern California. I'm in Redwood Country, Humboldt County, right on the coast. And let's see some of these values that are informing our work. Okay, equity. The larger the word, the more people entered that into Slido. Nothing is impossible if we work together. Teamwork. All right, cool. Respect. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you. This gives me a flavor of who's in the room and some of our core values that we share. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'll note as I get into the case study in Slido, there is let's use the chat for Q&A. But I will activate another question for you about halfway through just to see what's standing out for folks, what might need greater, clarification based on what I've shared so far. All right. So stand by, sharing my screen again with a slide deck. So as I get into the Nakama Ahaloa story, I thought it might be helpful just to orient this group to how, at least CoCreative, how we think of the work of systemic change. So when we talk about networks, I know like lots of people have different thought bubbles that appear over their heads what a network means, which is legit. There's many different kinds of networks. So when we talk about this work, we're talking about we believe like systemic change work, the work is about networks, whether we want it to be or not. Basically networks of relationships, of power, of privilege, of access, keep systems the way they are. So we can't really change systems without shifting the way we also essentially relate to one another, how we make meaning together, about what's happening in a given system and where we want to go. And that too often, we can be focused on like changing the people or changing the organizations within a system to the neglect of really reweaving the patterns of relationships among the people in that system. And so when we say networks, we really focus on what we think of as strong tie networks, but the work is always happening across lots of different people in a system who are engaging at different levels and engaging in the work in different ways, and using lots of different strategies. And so all of this is really adding up to shifts around mindset, around messages, often around sort of like boundaries that move a system. And we've found that really any effective network values like multiple ways of intervening in a system. And it's really that, like, it's that diversity of experience, the diversity of analysis, and diversity of approaches really that make this kind of work most effective and resilient. And the final thing I'll just offer, just again, to give you a framework of where I'm coming from when I talk about networks is, in our experience, a great network, it's not just a means to achieve some change we want. We really feel like it is the change that really any compelling network is really a prototype of the system that we actually want in the world. And it's the place where we can experience most directly about how we want the system to be. And so if we're connected in a network in really deep trusting relationships with each other, when we're deeply aligned around a powerful vision or purpose, when we're sharing the learning and actively co-designing the future we want together, when we're really engaged as whole people in the work with our hearts, our minds, our spirits, our hands, like that is one of the most profound shifts that we can make. And that is part of why I wanted to share this story about Nakama Ahaloa, because this is the spirit of this network. And it talks, and it speaks also to one of our mentors, Susan Davis, says, if you want to change the world, throw a better party. And to me, Nakama Ahaloa is throwing a better party, and it is changing the system of child welfare in the state of Hawaii in the United States. So here's the story about that. So I'm going to walk you through basically the launch, the first convening of this network, which happened in the fall of 2018. And the network's name is Nakama Ahaloa. I'm not Native Hawaiian. This network is based in Hawaii. I'll share more about like what its function, what its purpose is. But the name Nakama Ahaloa comes from a Native Hawaiian creation story. And that creation story tells, it's the story of how the connection between all Hawaiians and the natural world. And Haloa is both the first taro plant or kalo plant, and also the name of the first Hawaiian. And so Nakama is the children of Haloa, the first Hawaiian. So the purpose of Nakama Ahaloa, the sort of network masked goal, meaningful, audacious, specific, and time-bound goal that this network started with is the one you see on the left. When we first formed as a network, they set the goal as, by the year 2023, each Native Hawaiian child and youth age 0 to 26 affected by the foster care system is connected to and can sustain a lasting network of healthy, supportive, and enriching relationships. So this was important because, as is true in many systems, Native Hawaiians were overrepresented in the foster care system in the state of Hawaii. And there were a number of organizations that came together and recognized that the work that had been done to date was not affecting any real change in improving the quality of the relationships that supported these young people that were in the foster care system. And they were not originally focused at all with legal permanency. In other words, ensuring that like focusing on children being legally reunited with parents, bio parents, for example, but they wanted to make sure that the young Native Hawaiian children that were in the foster care system were sort of cradled by this network of relationships with their siblings, with their biological parents, with extended kinship networks of support, because they have found that if these relationships were able to be nurtured and remain intact, then that enabled young people that had even experienced significant trauma in their lives by being involved in the foster care system to thrive. And they would have these relationships to fall back on when times got difficult. So this was the original. I'll speak to the evolving goal and further on in the presentation. So in terms of the scene, when we launched this network, this was the space where we convened. It's in Oahu, in Waikiki, at a space called the Waiwai Collective. The Waiwai Collective, it's a Native Hawaiian operated space. It's sort of like a maker co-work space, holds cultural events, beautiful art installations that really lift up and speak to the Native Hawaiian culture. And in many ways are sort of, as many Native Hawaiians are getting, to quote one of them, priced out of paradise, that's part of this network. This was also an important place to gather because it was a reassertion of a Native Hawaiian space in a part of Waikiki that has seen significant displacement, right, of Native Hawaiian people. And so this was the space where we first convened. I would offer that you will rarely find, if maybe ever, CoCreative like launch a network or hold a meeting in a hotel conference room. We find like it's really important to have a space that has the right sort of set and setting for the kind of collaboration that we're after. It doesn't always have to be round, and you don't always have to have pillows, but these are things we consider when starting up collaborative systemic change work. So in terms of the people, we work with, whenever we're starting up a network or rebooting a network, we assemble what we think of as a design team and also a project team. So I'll tell you a little bit more about who is sort of the catalytic shepherds of this network. So this design team, they're not like a steering committee. They're not the deciders of strategy of a network. They're really the folks that help create the container that enables collaboration to happen. And in an ideal world, they're essentially a fractal. They represent a fractal of the wider system that we're working to create change within. And so the people you see assembled here come from the Backbone organization is a nonprofit organization that essentially functions as a bridge between the state child welfare system and also families that are impacted by the child welfare system. And they sort of have acted as a bridge, as a communicator, and often really feeling the tension of where that system breaks down. And so they serve as the backbone team, meaning there's dedicated staff time to support the ongoing operations of the network through that organization. You also have staff people from Child Welfare Services itself. So you have a director here, and you also have a sort of an on-the-ground caseworker as well. You also have funders on this design team from Liliuokalani Trust, a Native Hawaiian-focused philanthropic organization. And you also have folks from Kamehameha Schools, which is also a school system within the state of Hawaii that serves Native Hawaiian children. So this was the first iteration of the design team. These folks came together recognizing that the system that currently existed in the state of Hawaii was not ideal. It was not optimal. And they agreed. They actually ended up coming to one of our co-creative trainings because the methodology felt right to them. And it was at the training that they decided and agreed they wanted to launch this network, and they sketched up that first draft of a goal. So this is many months later in the convening where they have now assembled about 40 people, again, that span the whole system related to child welfare in the state of Hawaii. So these are the people that assembled. And one of our first pieces of work when we launch a network is aligning around what we refer to as a shared intent. So that means both like the purpose of our session, the reason why we're gathering, which you can see we stated here as the purpose of our network convening. We also aligned around, this is what we said we were going to do together in the day-and-a-half session. You can see when we design network sessions, we design outcomes across what we refer to as 4 agendas. So the 4 agendas also speak to those elements that I noted at the top of our call, just to give you a sense of our orientation to systemic change, which is, connecting at a heart level, aligning at, more at a spirit level, learning at a head level, and then also making with our hands. And so we really try to integrate all of those pieces into work together and align our outcomes across all 4 of those agendas as well. So we also, in terms of aligning around our shared intent, ask people highest hopes for the work of this network. So you can see some of the things people offered up in terms of highest hopes. And right out of the gate, you can see where people started to build the ethos or the culture of the network. So a number of people said, stick with itness. We're committed for the long haul. We didn't end up with the system we had overnight. It took multiple generations to arrive at the place where we are, and we're going to have to stick with one another in order to get this done. And a number of people pulled up what we sometimes think of, and sometimes put explicitly into the room, a creative tension around both doing important work around building relationships and getting some stuff done together. So it's both relationships and getting to action. So you can start to see, again, how we started to align. The draft goal we hold lightly. We brought it into the room and we asked people, what, if anything, needs to change about this goal? And so you can see we took edits to the draft goal. We didn't wordsmith in the moment, but we are, again, taking a dialogic approach to starting to align around what it is that we're actually interested in doing together, what we want to, what we're feeling compelled to do together. And then we also use this tool called Focus and Frame to help define the boundaries of the work of a network. So it's not saying like, we're only focusing on Native Hawaiian children and youth that are leaving or affected by the foster care system to the neglect of everything else. But we are saying we're going to focus our efforts and energy here on what you see on the inner circle. And while we're doing that, we're still going to pay attention to all Native Hawaiian children and youth, or all youth and children in the foster care system. Any solutions we design, we're going to make sure that they're not negatively impacting anything else that's still in frame. And in an ideal world, the things we're designing are actually, it's a win-win for other children that are not Native Hawaiian that are in the foster care system. But it helps give us some boundaries to initially work with. And what we've seen with many networks over time is that that boundary expands or contracts as needed as we get into the work. So this is a really simple way that we just describe what we're going to do together over a day and a half. We came into the convening on this far left. I know it cut off in the picture, but we came into the convening with interview insights. I'll show those in just a moment. This is a first pass at what we heard through a series of interviews is happening in the system. And then we support people to basically develop what we refer to as critical shifts. I'll share more about that. We diverge, converge around critical shifts. And then using our top set of critical shifts, we do some ideation about solutions, about how to make those shifts happen. We diverge, converge, and we come up with a strategy map. And you can see how we noted that's the work ahead of us over a day and a half. So I've noted that a big part of doing this work is having a shared picture or shared understanding of the problem, of what we sometimes refer to as the landscape. And so a big part of every convening, but particularly the launch of a network, we do spend a lot of time sort of unpacking and learning about the system. So here's how we did it with Makama Ahaloa. So usually we always do some kinds of interview or stakeholder interview process. And we, meaning not just CoCreative, but in this case, that design team that I showed you a picture of, and that backbone team that were part of the design team, went out and interviewed, I believe for this network launch, I think we talked to about 45 different people in the system. They're social workers, they worked for the state, they worked for nonprofits that had contracts with the state. We talked with people who worked a lot with Native Hawaiian young people through cultural programming, teachers in the school systems, philanthropic organizations. Lots of, so giving you a sense of the system leaders. And then we also, one of the backbone organization also has like this youth leadership team. These are young people with lived experience in the foster care system who are now essentially like peer allies or peer support people. Those peer support folks went out and interviewed young people to get their experience, their perspective on what's working and not working within the foster care system. And so in that way, we were able to connect with Native Hawaiian young people who had direct experience, and they were able to talk directly with peers instead of talking with adults. And so we basically synthesized all of these insights and brought out a set of what you see here is sort of system maps, where we just charted it and noted some of the key themes. And so the color coding is really around like challenges, assets, and opportunities. And so as a network, people just had time to individually do this gallery walk. And then the Post-it notes you see is people's additions to these system maps that, again, then we talked through verbally and processed verbally. And again, through a dialogic approach, started to make some sense together about what was happening in this space. You'll get this deck if you're curious about more of at a content level about what's going on. So I just am highlighting this one because it came as like a really key theme. And this system was especially from the youth's perspective, one of the things they offered was building and maintaining key relationships in their lives was key. And it was really hard because oftentimes when they were removed from their homes, they didn't just get, moved to a resource caregiver's home that was still in their neighborhood or still in their community. They didn't get to, they often had to move across an island or even to a different island. It meant uprooting everything about their lives. And it also meant that sometimes if children were removed from their homes and they had 4 or 5 siblings, they were also separated from each other. And that became an important insight, frankly, that many of the system leaders in the room hadn't really grappled with, just how traumatic that experience was. And so this became a really important point and ultimately a place where they started to develop a focus and a number of solutions around. More landscape maps. Here's folks processing. And once we did all that work to just talk through and start to make sense of the system and some of the key things that needed to shift about the system, we started to do this work, which we refer to as aligning on critical shifts. So a critical shift is some pretty simple statements. It's a two-part statement, and the first part of that statement describes the way some part of the system is now. And the second part of that statement describes how that part of the system would ideally be in the future. So, we offered examples of what we have found to be like good or helpful shifts, like the one you see here. And also we found over the years of doing this, it's also helpful to give people an example of what is unhelpful in terms of a shift statement, because they're about to generate these. Sometimes people insert, they're just not specific enough, or sometimes people insert a preferred solution into the future state. We're trying to avoid that. We're simply trying to name the problem space within which we will start to ideate potential solutions, action steps we could take to make these shifts happen. So here is the starter list that Nakama Ahaloa worked from. This was the set of critical shifts that after the design team produced that landscape map, had done all of those interviews, these were the things, draft critical shifts that they created and came into this network meeting with. So you can see there's shifts related to safety and well-being. There's shifts around trauma-informed approaches, one around lifting up youth and family voice, so that youth and family voice contributes to systems change. And another one I'll lift up is around resource caregivers. So these are the folks that are maybe more commonly known as foster families. So these resource caregivers, were currently really not very well supported when working with children that have high needs, that have experienced significant trauma in their lives. Desired future state is resource caregivers would be supported in the work with all of the children that they have in their homes. So you can see it's a to from statement that we're after here. And this is the point in time in the session where we start to diverge on critical shifts and start to converge. So we do this through this sort of I'll give you this picture of it, a 2x2 process. So basically people spend solo time reflecting on that set of shifts. They might add new shifts. They might edit shifts that currently exist. Then they partner up, prioritize two as a team of two, get into quads, prioritize two, and ultimately we come together again as a large group of this 8 people each in each group with an output of 2 critical shifts per group. We offer up prioritization questions to help them collectively make sense of how they might think about which shifts are top priorities. And ultimately, this was the output. So this is the first, this is a point in a network where we start to converge and we say, based on our shared analysis, these are the things we believe most need to change in a system in order for us to achieve our goal. It's a moment where we're sort of scanning and collectively saying, does this make sense to us? This is, some people call it a theory of change. And, I know that means many things to many people, but like, we're sort of saying like, this is our first bets. If we could really impact change in these areas, we believe we could really make powerful progress towards that meaningful, audacious, and specific and time-bound goal we have for ourselves. So this was their first bet on that. So I wanted to just pause. I know I've been talking so much, and frankly, I'm not used to talking that much as a facilitator. So I would love to understand. I'm going to activate something. I would love to understand if you're still with me. And what, if anything, is standing out to you so far? So I just activated a poll in Slido. I'll drop that link in the chat just in case it disappeared for you. Sometimes that happens. So if anything's standing out to you so far, I'd love to understand it. And then I'll keep going. I'll finish out this story, I promise. Cool. Here's what's coming in, folks. Tools, framing, and the prioritizing exercises. Okay, cool. Good to know. Power of networks. All right. Ooh. Sorry, my cursor's there. I think. Nice. Yeah, double diamond, converging and diverging. Cool. Yeah, we spend a lot of time, not a lot, but like we love to just presence the convergence and divergence thing for people so they also know, like, don't worry, we're not going to endlessly diverge. But also, don't worry, we're not going to converge too early. Really cool. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing back reflections. All right. Let me close out this story in the next few minutes. Stand by. Yeah, great question about the all right, cool. I'll pick up this one question now that it just came in. Youth in these discussions to get firsthand accounts. Yeah, so in addition to the interview process that the young people did with other young people in the system, so that was a big way in which youth voice came through in terms of the analysis. But in terms of like who's in the room, we specifically asked people from organizations, many to participate, who also had firsthand experience of being a young person involved in the foster care system, and now also had a professional role inside of an organization. So for us, that was like step one. And partially it was around the design team wanting to have that direct experience, but also wanting to move cautiously and not invite youth in without having assurance that the network was gonna be a good, positive, safe place for them to be. And so, and also have resources to support their participation, because like these people were getting paychecks. Still, some of them thought it was like extra to their job, but like ultimately that's changed over time. But we also didn't have a mechanism to provide stipends just yet. And so by the time we had a second convening of this network, that was actually where we had some really powerful conversations. Young people, actually a dad and his daughter came in and shared their experience of the foster care system from being separated while he was incarcerated for a stretch. And ultimately, they became members of the network. And so that's increased over time in terms of having both bio parents as part of the network and also young people as part of the network, and the supports that help them get there, like transportation, for example. All right, so once we had agreement on our top shifts, we started to do some work to generate ideas for solutions, strategies that could make each of these shifts happen. So this is where we basically invite people to vote with their bodies and go join a shift of their choice. And knowing that they're just going to work on one today, but they could certainly choose to work on others in the future. So we do this by basically using a lot of Post-it notes when we're in person. We do this another way when we're working virtually. But basically people generate a lot of ideas for solutions. That's what you're seeing below the line. And then we invite people to move up. Again, they're working in small groups to move above the line any of the top most promising ideas of all that got generated. So you can see here again, this was a shift around training and staffing. A ton of ideas got generated. So there's this process of like, move above the line, any of your top ideas. And then we asked people to do this impact and feasibility matrix. So they take all their top ideas. First, they sort them along this continuum of impact. And it's impact in relationship to one another. So in relationship to one another, which ideas, again, these are their top prioritized ideas, do they believe to be like least impactful to most impactful? And then keeping them in that column, they move them up along the feasibility line. And it just gives them another tool to analyze which might be promising strategies, solutions, ideas for systemic change that they might want to take on first. So this is just a map. This one that had the top dots got developed out further, but you can start to see how they made sense. And again, this is a very dialogic approach to doing this kind of work. So they're talking through making sense of these ideas together. So then they take these top ideas and turn them into what we think of as concepts. And so we developed this, and we change it up every time, but we have a concept worksheet that we provide. And so it just asks people to start to spell it out, describe your top idea. How would it work in practice? Who would we need to succeed? What resources are required? What might be some challenges we can anticipate hitting? And what might be some concrete next steps? And so here's some pictures of network members completing this concept worksheet. You can see we love to invite people to do individual work first and then group processing work. We try to be really attuned and sensitive to different ways people process information and make space for that in any facilitated process. So these were some of the top concepts that emerged at this session. Yeah, so this is a 1.5 day process. And so maybe before I close, I'll go back and do that double diamond thing again. So this is day 2. At the end of day 1 was where we landed at our top critical shifts. And so we started day 2 coming back with those top critical shifts and did that ideation process and this concept development work. So I'll land on this one. This was, again, focused on the sibling connections, maintaining those sibling connections for young people that were separated from their siblings when they were placed in resource caregivers' homes. Okay, so it's always helpful to gather feedback on these concepts once they get developed. And so that's what this whole section's about. This is a process tool we've used where people give quick pitches. People then tell them, the rest of the network tells that small group what they like about that concept, what might change, what they might want to learn or test next. So you can see some examples here. All right. So this is the close of day 2. So remember, this is a 1.5 day process. So this is like approaching the noon hour on day 2. These were the shift groups that formed, and we asked people to sort of assess now at 2 levels, which of these shifts seem, again, these were our first bets. So which of these now seem like they're the right shifts to focus on? That's what you see here in this column. And then, importantly, who would actually want to be part of a work group to continue to advance the solutions that got generated in this session? And to continue to advance those concepts really means to usually move to prototyping them and then testing them with many other people in the system, either abandoning that because it flops, they discover it's not desirable or feasible, or they learn that it's actually really powerful, great idea, and let's move it forward and move to pilot. So you can see we're testing at 2 levels, where people have personal energy and where people like conceptually think we should go as a network. And this is where I wanted to just highlight for this group, because I'm moving towards close. We really see networks sort of advancing work at different levels. And so what I just mostly shared with you, and what often comes up in this first iteration of strategy development, is like whole network projects, initiatives, et cetera, that we could all collectively do together. And the work happens in many other ways too. Sometimes it spawns like collaborations or partnerships or ventures of members of the network. You know, a couple of organizations link up and decide to do something together. That totally happened here. Sometimes there's spin-offs of the network. That's also actually kind of in the process of happening here now with this network. And sometimes it's about, you know, sending out signals to the larger system about sort of change that's occurring. And that's definitely happening with this network. So I won't go into this, but that was almost 5 years ago now, or was it 5 years ago? Around there. Things evolve over time. And so this network has continued to do its work. And you can see this is now a new articulation of its shared intent. And you can see the working goal has changed. They now are focused, like they're still focused on relational permanency, and they've sort of upped their ambition around ensuring that Native Hawaiian children are no longer disproportionately represented in the child welfare system. And here's where those seedlings of concepts that you saw them develop in that half day of day 2 in our in-person very first launch of the convening. This is the work that of each of those work groups currently. So they're deeply involved with the child welfare system now, and part of training up all social workers that come into that system now. So they understand more deeply the Native Hawaiian values, values around family, traditional wisdom, values around relationships, and also for resource caregivers. They have developed an advisory council to child welfare services that's centering family voice. So these are biological bio family members who had been separated from their children, have direct experience with child welfare service, directly advising the child welfare system now. There's a lot of work happening around strengthening sibling connections, and also supporting resource caregivers. And so on this next slide, I'm not going to show you the video, but there's this video that they produced during the pandemic that was really speaking to weaving together Ohana, or weaving together family, and strengthening the connections between resource caregivers and biological parents, all with the purpose of better supporting the young people that are part of the system. Feeling like if there were healthy relationships there and good bonds there, the children only stand to benefit from that. All right. There's a number of other slides here, but I'm going to stop because I know we're almost at time, that give you a little bit more of a sense of some of the frameworks that we use when we're supporting networks in the systemic change work.
Great. Thank you very much, Heather. I think we have a question from Michael here. How do you evaluate the value and impact of the critical shifts?
Yeah, you know, every network does it differently. It is the reason why we like to use critical shifts, because it gives us something to look back on. Sometimes people use proxy metrics in order to evaluate impact, and different networks approach measurement and evaluation different ways. I'm pretty sure at this point in time, Nakama has contracted out with evaluators to measure their impact. It had been like an in-house role for a stretch. And there was this question around budget. They did require additional budget resources. And this was where having a network that's really representative of the whole system in the room was really helpful. There were a number of funders in the room participating, like as co-strategy design people. There's funders on the design team. And so ultimately they were able to tap into many of those partners, just stepped forward when the network needed resources to implement certain solutions. And sometimes it did change, it did speak to the way in which, for example, here, Child Welfare Services like reallocated its existing funding.
Then we have a last question here. I recognize the general design thinking process, but did you base your methodology on a specific source?
We really, you can see that it's a sort of a mashup of so many different things. When I looked at your Miro board, it seemed like maybe it was touching on a number of items. Yeah, human-centered design, systems thinking, even some elements of like lean methodologies. Honestly, a big part of our work comes from polarity thinking. If you're familiar with Dr. Barry Johnson, his work around polarity partnership, you might want to check that work out. We really draw a lot from polarity thinking too.
Great. Well, maybe we have 1 minute for a last question from Zita. Was there a mechanism to consistently collect feedback? Curious about the feedback loop process.
Yeah. So we've taken different approaches. And so when testing prototypes, so feedback could come at different levels. When a network's designing and developing prototypes, there's always a feedback loop that they'll go through where they'll go out and test that with other people in the system to see, like, is that desirable? Is it impactful? Is it feasible? And then they'll sort of collect that intelligence and sort through it as a working group or an initiative group. But then there's also the feedback across the whole network. As each of these initiative groups are out advancing solutions, we're also always weaving it back across the whole network. And so that's where every network's different. Nakama Haloa, in this case, they meet as a whole network every 6 months. And so they're constantly keeping one another informed. of the strategy deployment, and they're also getting feedback across the whole network on everything that's being developed.
Great. Awesome, Heather. Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation, for this case study. I think it was wonderful to see, the importance of relationships and the importance of actually bringing a lot of diversity and a lot of perspectives together, right, to get to this common goal and then work towards this collective goal, right, that people have in the group created, which I think is a very important part of systems change as well, being able to see your creation and the development of that to reach a certain next step, right? So this has been very enjoyable, very insightful. Thank you very much for being here, for taking the time to share with us some of your work. And for the ones who would like to know Heather and CoCreative a bit more, I left here in the Miro board, Heather's LinkedIn page, so you can share some more questions and comments with her. And here you have the link. Here's the CoCreative website, so you can check that out as well. We shared the link to the Miro board now with you, so you can have that. And we've added here the link to the presentation and some other events that are happening very soon, and will be very good to check those out as well, coming up on July and June. So I definitely recommend those ones. And thank you everyone for being here. As always, it's been a pleasure having you here. And our next step in the learning series is our introduction to systems building, which is happening on June 7th, the same time, same Miro board, same Zoom link. And yeah, you have the link to this session right here on the top left, so you can check that out. And as always, here you have ways to connect with the SI London Hub, so the website, the LinkedIn, Twitter, and the YouTube channel where this recording is going to be available. And finally, a feedback session for you to let us know if you understand the concepts presented here today, if the session was, the format was effective for you to understand the content, and if you have any ideas on how we can improve things in our next sessions and events. Okay. Thank you again, everyone. And yeah, hope to see you in 2 weeks. And thank you again, Heather, for your time, for the work. And yeah, hope to connect soon as well. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.